Hello, so today we're going to talk about ethics and integrity in sport. Although there is not a specific chapter that this information is being pulled from, it's being pulled from multiple sources. I wanted to ensure that you had this information and you were able to successfully navigate through some scenarios you may encounter as a coach. Sports is this great paradox. It's the sinner and the savior, depending on who you speak to. It's why life under a microscope, with every social issue, good and bad, can be thrown in with the element of competition and human nature and parents and their kids and their feelings all mixed up together, and things seem to be muddied. No one escapes the pull of sport if they're involved in sport, and no one can escape living their life with integrity or acting ethically. But sport can bring out the best and worst in everyone involved when it comes to this issue. Take, for instance, the individuals that are listed here. There's a picture of the Chicago White Sox from 1919. Eight of those players were allegedly bribed by gamblers to throw the World Series. They were banned from baseball for life, even though they were later acquitted of criminal charges. There have been instances in cycle tours where riders have scattered broken glass or fans have tossed nails in the roadway to kind of give their rivals a disadvantage so that their competitor could win the race. In 1980, the first woman to cross the finish line at the Boston Marathon was a 23-year-old, and she did it in the third fastest time ever recorded for a female runner, which was 2 hours and 31 minutes. But eventually, a few spectators came forward and said they saw her join the race during the final half mile, and then she just sprinted to the end. Now, who knows why people do these things? I've also got images of Tanya Harding, a former U.S. national skating champion who allegedly had Nancy Kerrigan, her top competitor, clubbed in the leg, and she was put under a criminal investigation even though she went on to win the championship. And then we have Johnson here, who was a Canadian sprinter in the 1988 Olympics. He won the 100-meter sprint title in a world record time. He beat Carl Lewis, who was his American rival, but it was found out that he tested positive for anabolic steroids. So these are all different ethical issues, not always dealing with money, but sometimes just dealing with success and the need to win. So in sport, the question is, how can we make sure our players or other people are equipped to get it right and not just avoid getting it wrong? Because there is a difference. There's pressure to succeed at a very young age in sports, and that pressure can come from the parents, the coaches, the different clubs, or the fans. And so a lot of times that can lead to integrity issues. We have training on rules, codes, and policies to keep people from making poor choices and to educate them on the risk if they do decide to make those poor choices, but they still make them. And the question is why? And it has a lot to do with human nature and if the risk is worth the reward in their mind in that moment. Before we dive any deeper into some of the more psychological aspects of ethics, let's talk a little bit about some definitions. Ethics is the study of morals or character. It's a study of principles of human duty or the study of all moral qualities that distinguish an individual relative to others. Morals pertains to an individual's motives, intentions, and actions, as in right or wrong, good or bad, virtuous or vicious. Values are anything that have relative worth. So if you put moral values together, that's the relative worth that's placed on someone's virtual behavior. So how they act, how they respond, that's based on, their personal feelings, their personal values. So, ethics guides the behavior and choices that we make by incorporating the rules, principles, values, and the purpose for what we're actually doing. So, judging a decision as unethical or lacking integrity is not as straightforward as whether someone has made a clear trade between cheating and winning. How we perceive what the best or the good choices are usually based on our values. Those common values are honesty, respect, fairness, compassion, responsibility, trust, honor, courage, and commitment. So, being ethical is not always a clear choice between right and wrong. And we'll get into that a little bit later. Let's talk about the moral reasoning process. When I'm saying moral reasoning, I'm referring to the process of evaluating a situation. So, the way that we reason through any situation that we encounter. So, moral reasoning is the systematic process of evaluating personal values and developing a consistent and impartial set of moral principles by which to live. And these will vary from individual to individual. And then moral justification is the process where an individual evaluating questionable action attempts to make it seem right. So, looking at a situation, the unethical situation was really ethical. That is, the muddy waters and the wrong look right to that person. And they'll find a way to justify that or look for a way to shine a favorable light on those acts in order to maintain a clear conscience. This ethical architecture kind of shows how our ethics and how our ethics are kind of constructed and how we're influenced by the things that go on in our life. So ethics is a matter of being good, your character, and doing the right thing in an action. And so when you're looking at that, what's your rationale for doing what you do? Or what's your objective in your sport participation? That's your purpose there at the top. And then holding up your purpose are your values and your principles. So your principles are the fundamental truths that help you work out right or wrong, like do unto others as they would do unto you, don't harm anyone, play by the rules, etc. And then your values, again, are what you hold most important. And within that construct, you've also got your morals, which are things that you're taught in your life, on your life journey, and it's affected by your religion, your culture, your personal beliefs, your ideologies. And beneath that, you've got your rules and standards that you live by, and you've got law and culture. So let's talk about the traps. These are misconceptions, myths, distortions, justifications, rationalizations, and flat out excuses for why people participate in unethical behavior. There's no rule against it, everyone does it. It's not unethical because no one will ever know about it. The circumstances require me to act this way. Sometimes cheating's just a part of the game. If you aren't cheating, you aren't trying hard enough. It didn't matter since they would have won anyway. It's only cheating if you get caught. I didn't have a choice. It's not my fault. It's a stupid rule anyway. No one would ever know. So, oftentimes, unthinking customs and habits can get in the way of good ethical decision making. Sometimes we don't see these things, sometimes we look the other way. And one way to detect early warnings of attitudes, habits, biases, distortions, and justifications and excuses that can lead you or your athletes down the wrong path is to mention and discuss these slippery slope traps, because they need to be quickly avoided and as soon as possible address the action if it has already happened so that you're not dealing with an even larger dilemma. Ethical decision making. So, as a coach, you have to think about what sportsmanship will look like. So, these questions that are listed here are things you should ask yourself when you're making an ethical decision. And a couple of slides over, there'll be a framework that you can use. And through a series of questions, you can identify what your dilemma is and figure out your plan of action. But it's important to know what sportsmanship looks like. Okay? Is sportsmanship playing fair, respecting the judgments of the officials, treating opponents with respect, uh, not cheating, not taunting, following the letter and spirit of the rules, shaking hands at the end of the game. Identify what sportsmanship should look like for your team and give your athletes an opportunity to practice ethical decision making so that they're aware of any possible slippery slope traps they could run into. Everybody has excuses. There are many expressions that coaches use about excuses. If you'd like to Google them, they are numerous. I kid you not. But the main point here is to not help them to make excuses, but to help them make sound decisions. So, where do you stand on these scenarios? Coaches teaching basketball players how to foul in ways that are difficult to detect. That's something that you will find in many practices, and it's not thought of as an unethical thing. You're essentially teaching a player how to distract or to rile up the opponent so that they're less focused, which gives you a better opportunity for success. But how does that really look to your players when you're teaching it? Are you verbally demeaning your opponents? There is a safe level of competition where you may talk back and forth with another athlete. You may challenge them. But when you start to demean your opponents, you're starting to teeter on that very slippery slope. There are coaches who'll try to pump up their team by swearing at the officials or getting a technical foul because then they know the coach is really behind them and passionate about it, just like they are, and it just shows them all this energy. And the thing is, you have to find a way to motivate your athletes without putting yourself in that negative situation. And then with your athletes, flopping or feigning an injury to get ahead in the game, pretending they got fouled, falling all over when nothing happened. This happens a lot in soccer. It happens in basketball. I'm sure it happens in other sports, but those are the ones where you'll see it's most prevalent. There are plenty of YouTube videos out there that show players flopping or feigning an injury or pretending they were hit in the face in order to get ahead. And that's not a behavior that you want to encourage in your athletes. So, making those ethical decisions. Ethical decision making is a process that involves building an awareness of the ethical content, such as the values, principles, and beliefs. And then it involves reflection on the dilemma, and then it requires a plan of action. So, my question to you is, how are you going to teach this? How are you going to make decisions? Can a coach stress winning and simultaneously teach moral values? Of course they can. Is it going to be difficult? Yes, it will be, because there are situations where the ethical decision-making process will not be easy. Things you want to review when you're reviewing the ethical decision-making format is an intentional rule violation happening here? Is it a tactile rule violation? Is there an ethical way to attempt to secure a victory? Is cheating, which is intentional deception or circumvention of the rules that were established, is that an intent to get away with things to gain an advantage? Why would you want to do that? Are rule violations ethical if they're not caught and penalized? If they are attempted and penalized, when that happens, are these rule violations still acceptable to you as a coach? What is it that you're going to communicate to your athletes? That's kind of what you want to go through when you're looking at this framework. Final thoughts. Remember that as a coach, you can tell your players the rules. You can tell them the policies, the procedures, the ethical behaviors that are expected, but you cannot tell them what to believe in. Give them as much information about ethical decision making as possible. And to change behavior, you have to pay attention to their motivations and their aspirations. That's why when it comes to developing value-based decisions, the important element is to help people work out what matters for themselves. This is the best way to get things to stick. There's not always an ideal answer or decision that's going to leave you completely comfortable once you've worked through a dilemma, but when that ethical decision making happens, you'll feel comfortable that you've done the best thing for the circumstances. If there's still an athlete who's unsure, it's important that they talk to you. So leave that conversation opportunity available to them to communicate their concern, to ask you questions without fear of judgment. And the same thing goes for you. You should identify a professional mentor that you can go to when you fall into those gray areas or when the water seems muddied, so that you have the opportunity to make the best decision possible. Again, back to one of my previous lessons, your athletes are always watching you. They pay attention more to your actions than they do to your words. So, being aware of your ethical decision making process and the actions that you perform after you've made an ethical decision are going to be key to earning their trust and respect, and also to having a positive impact on them as athletes. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me via email and I'll be happy to assist you.